Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Teresa Combs. I'm the Regional Program Manager for Region 8.
And I'm Chris Cross. I'm the division with the Division of FRYSC. I am the budget specialist, and we're going to just go ahead and jump right in. I've been with the division for I'm on my third year now. I'm actually married to a YSC coordinator, so I like to say that I've got 15 years FRYSC experience, but I don't know how much that actually counts, but I like to think it counts. And hopefully, we're going to jump right in and get started about FRYSC Funding 101, anything and everything you ever wanted to possibly know about how our funds are put together, how we monitor them, how we give them out to all our FRYSC centers, and how eventually they get to you to implement the great work that you're doing out there. So I'm going to turn my video off. There we go. So again, like I said, welcome to FRYSC Funding 101. So just like everything in government, it starts with our legislature. Every even year, the General Assembly must create and pass a biennial budget. That usually starts for us in around July of the odd year, and that's when the LRC, which is the budgeting of basically the tool of the legislature, that's when they come to us and they say, hey, it's time to start thinking about your budget for the next 2 years. What do you need? What do you want? What are your priorities? So there's two different requests that come in, we get to put in for. One's called current services. Our current services are just an extension of what we've been doing. It's usually we project, what's it going to cost us to continue to operate the FRYSC program statewide. And usually the LRC gives us some guidance on that, and they'll tell us to anticipate like a 1 or 2% increase in cost for cost of living, cost of working, cost of operation. The other type of budget request that we get to initiate is called an additional funding request. We just did this. We've just implemented a new one of these. We were lucky to get one. A lot of you may have heard about it. This last budget session, we did a ABR to try to split as many of our centers that were serving more than one school. We put in that request, we requested about $9 million. That's what we thought statewide that would take if we were able to split every center that was serving more than one school. We sent that to the cabinet secretary. It made his list of, his priorities for the cabinet that got put onto the governor's budget plan and eventually to the General Assembly. General Assembly looked at it. They set their priorities for the next 2 years. And luckily we got about half of that we asked. We asked for about 9 million and we ended up getting about 3.9. So once we got that funding, that's how it all starts. It starts with that General Assembly. I like to brag on ourselves here for a minute. We were able to split 73 centers statewide and increase our number from about 890 centers serving students to 963 with those additional funds. So that's a lot of budget information there. Just this is how it works. So in total for FY25 and FY26, the Division of FRYSC has about $74 million. Now, I've just kind of rounded that and estimated. We got very specific numbers, but statewide to operate our program, which is all 963 centers statewide, it's $74 million. What's unique about FRYSC funding is that the General Assembly back in 1991, with the Act of CARE that created all of this, they want to make sure that it's always a partnership, a collaboration. So when they appropriate our funds, we get it in two different places. So basically our appropriation comes down to this. Just as the Family Resource and Youth Service Centers believe in partnering to bring resources together, our funding is a partnership between CHFS and KDE. So we get those amounts. If you were to pull up the budget bill from this last cycle, and you said, hey, Chris, I'm looking here, it says CHFS FRYSC, they're only getting, it says 26 million, but you're telling us it's 74 million. I'd have to tell you that you're going to need to look under KDE's allotment too. That's how we get all 100% of our FRISC funding. So just as I was explaining before, if you were to pull up the budget bill from this last cycle, 35% of our funds can be found in the CHFS budget, which is approximately $26 million. The other 65% of our funding can be found in the Kentucky Department of Education. And the legislature gives them $48 million to disperse back to us. This is just, you know, when I first started with FRISC, I thought, well, this is just crazy. Why can't the General Assembly just give us all the money? Because it ends up with us anyway. But it's really the idea that we're going to partner with KDE. This is Health and Family Services in the schools partnering with KDE. So twice a year, I put in a request. First half of the year, I asked for half of that $48 million to be transferred to us. And then the second half of the year, I asked for the remaining. And it just keeps that partnership alive in the budget cycle that, you know, we are working with KDE. These are two entities coming together to provide these services. So let's get a little deeper into the state budget. So here's how the numbers are going to break down and shake out. So of that $74 million, the Division of FRISC has to take an admin cost off the top of that. The legislature changes year to year on the percentages we can take. Roughly this year, we had to take about $2.8 million. $2.8 million for the Division of FRISC is salary, fringe, travel, copiers, printers, computers, anything that we need to operate at the state level is going to be wrapped up in that $2.8 million. So after we take the admin cost off the top of the total amount given by the state, we're left with the $71,200,000. Now, the thing that a lot of us are looking at right now, you know, RPMs have been contacting you about your free lunch numbers. So what we do every year is December 1st, we're going to pull those free lunch numbers statewide. And then once we have that total, we're going to divide it by the $71,200,000. Every bit that we have, we try to get out to centers. We don't hold anything back extra. So for example, last year, statewide, we had around 339,000 students on free lunch. So when you divide the 71 million by the 339,000, it gets us to our $210 per student amount. And that's what you're getting in your centers based on those numbers. That's how we come up with it. Our job every day, and especially mine, is get all the funds out to the centers because that's where the impact is. That's where the work matters. So just like I said, right now we're reviewing those free lunch numbers. Statewide, we're kind of seeing a decrease in free lunch numbers. We're looking into it. We're considering some repools, but you know, our goal at the state level is to never have to drop below the 210 per student allotment. So that brings us to another goal that we had this year, is starting with fiscal year FY25, the division increased our minimum grant award from 180 to 239 free lunch students. I know a lot of schools out there, you know, maybe you're new to the FRISC world, maybe you're part of a school district that's in AFD, and sometimes this doesn't really get translated out great to everyone to understand how these minimum and maximum grants work. But with a student allocation of 210 per student, basically we went from 180 free lunch students. So our minimum grant award up until this year had been $37,800. At the new number of 239, that put our minimum grant at $50,190. So we were pretty pleased with this. We were excited. That's a $12,000 increase to really get to shore up the work of these minimum grant centers. We thought, you know, it is hard to operate and pay for a coordinator at $37,000. I mean, was almost all salary. We couldn't do any, we were limited on the work they could do. So this is our goal. We don't see coming back down from this. This is something we're going to fight for and keep. On the same end of the spectrum, we only have so many funds. So we actually have a maximum grant award, and that's based on 450 free lunch students. Basically, once you hit 450, that's the biggest grant you can receive. And last year it was 94,500. So let me show you this next screen here. So by
Hey,
the
Chris,
numbers, yeah, go ahead.
we got a hand raised there, and we also had Dominique Thomas had said, her and her experience, many families are declining to complete the forms because they don't really want to share the income information on the free reduced lunch forms. Just
Okay.
as just a thing to take into account there. I know you were talking about the decrease, and then I believe it's Kayla. You got your hand raised.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm at Owensboro Public Schools, and we're on AFD still. So, like, okay. So I'm looking at your screen now. So so they've got total free and reduced or whatever. So 606, but they can only go up to 450, and that's as much as they can get. So that spreadsheet, like we all got that last year whenever they split the centers. So, I mean, obviously, I saw like what my allotment was from, I guess, the state going into the district. And then with it being on AFD, it gets all reworked to where I get a different amount. I'm trying to think what my question was there. Are you going to go over AFD at all, or that'll be later or something else entirely?
Yeah, we're going to try to touch on every aspect of budgeting for FRYSC
Okay.
Center. So we are going to hit on AFD here pretty shortly. But yeah,
Okay.
so just like Caleb pointed out, so this is a sheet that we send out statewide eventually. We're still hard crunching some numbers, trying to make sure we have the best counts in total. But this is just like the top of the list. I picked a couple just to point out. So if you look at Caldwell County there in the pink highlight, the Hope Center, their total free reduced last year was 606 students. Unfortunately, we can't fund all 606 students. So that's where that maximum grant kicks in. Once you hit 450, we can't fund above that. Eventually down the road on our dream list that, we'd love to increase that minimum. We're so dependent on what the legislature gives us to get it out to the coordinators that right now the 450 is pretty much locked in for probably a little while. Now, if you look down at Graves County, highlighted in the green, this is the whole other end of the spectrum. Fancy Farm FRC, they only had a total free student population of 162 students. Again, you can't operate a center 210 times 162 students. It's not enough. You can't hire somebody. So what we did by increasing that minimum grant, they automatically are going to get paid for having 239 students. So once anything below 239, those centers are automatically going to get brought up to 239 to ensure that even our smallest populations are served and are receiving a minimum $50,000 grant. To the comment about the numbers and the decrease and trying to get the forms filled out, this is something we talk about a lot at the division, especially with CEP now taking over. A lot of schools going to complete free lunch and not having to do the forms. It's something we're really looking at over the next few years. We're trying to think if there's another way, if there's some other numbers we can, try to tie in. But right now it's just a work in progress. And unfortunately, this is what we have for this year and probably the next few years. So my favorite topic, and when you hear my name come up the most, and I like this quote from Henry Ford, money is like an arm or a leg, use it or lose it. And that's basically how these funds work. We get a 2-year allotment of funding to send out to the FRYSC centers, and we expect you to spend it. We need you to spend it because anything that we send back to the state, we have to explain, well, you asked for this much, but you didn't spend it. So, what's the problem? Why do you keep asking for more money if you can't spend it? So we call this any unspent funds and left in your center, we consider carry forward. And that's a term that we use internally. We share that with everyone. But carry forward is any funds not spent out of your center by the end of the year. So everyone knows that all grant funds must be liquidated within 25 days of the end of the fiscal year, so July 25th. And that's in your administrator's guidebook. That's a KDE regulation. That's just something that we follow strictly. So any money not spent by this time will be considered carry forward funds. And that money will remain with your district to be spent, and that amount will be deducted from your next year's reimbursement. And I know this gets confused among all the finance people at your local districts. Coordinators get this kind of confused sometimes, but I'm hoping we can clear it up here. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And I can go over it more than once. But basically, we at the division don't have a mechanism to pull back funds. Once we electronically wire each district their funds, and we do that quarterly, the funds are at the district. You know, it would be a huge undertaking for our division to try to bring back and bill those funds back from the district. So instead of doing that, we consider the funds carry forward. And what that means is if you have money unspent in your center, we expect the finance person at the board office to do a JV in MUNIS and move those remaining funds to the next fiscal year for your center. So hopefully I'm going to put this graphic up. I've worked on a couple different ones. It's a very confusing concept, I think, and hopefully it'll work. So this is how carry forward is supposed to work. So if you look on the left side of the screen under year 1, FY25 budget, your operating budgets was $12,000. At the end of the year, you've spent $9,500. So unspent, you have $2,500. So what I see from most districts is that they think you need to reduce the preceding year's budget by $2,500. That is not true. That is not the case. Those funds stay at your district. So when it comes to your next year budgeting, what you're going to want to do is you're going to have the same budget again, $12,000, but we're just simply moving those funds forward. But on our end, when we go to make your third quarter payment, we just reduce it by $2,500 because in our minds, and the way it's set up with the state, which is kind of already prepaid that $2,500. So I'm going to pause there for a minute. That was a lot of information. Is there any questions? I'm not really. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep chugging along then. So yeah, so if anytime a district contact, a finance person says you did not spend all your funds this year, you need to reduce your budget for next year, that's not true. Those funds are staying with you. We're just not going to pay them again for that following year. So now we're going to kind of go over alternative funding districts throughout the state. Several years back, the Division of Family Resource Centers started the alternative funding distribution option. And basically, this allows school districts flexibility when distributing their FRYSC funds. Districts could benefit from the AFD option if the cost for keeping a center open for the required 240 days is more than the funding amount the district receives from the Division of FRYSC to operate that center. If approved to operate an AFD, a district may combine all center funds received into the district budget, subtract all coordinator salaries and fringes, leaving an amount to be divided based on the free lunch count for each center. And this is an annual process. Just because your district has been AFD does not mean they can always remain AFD. They have to apply every year to the Division of FRYSC. Marianne Jennings sends out an email pretty soon, actually, it should be going out, that'll say, hey, it's time to start planning and applying for AFD. So what are the requirements of the AFD program? A district must submit a request annually. That's what I just went through that. A district must have a board-approved salary schedule for the FRISC. So, or for everyone, actually. If your board doesn't have an approved salary schedule, you're automatically not going to be eligible for participation in the AFD program. There are other requirements. The district finance must commit to run a mid-year MUNIS report to determine if salary and fringe are reflective of the current approved AFD spreadsheet. Okay, so what does that mean? It means around January 1st, we'd like all of our participants to run a mid-year MUNIS report to make sure all the funds will be spent out by the end of the year. So did you have someone go on unpaid sick leave and those funds were sitting there for a month that didn't get spent, that were anticipated to be spent? Did someone retire and then a new hire was brought out at maybe a lower salary? That's why we look for that mid-year MUNIS report. That's the time where we can hopefully change those operating budgets to get all those funds dispersed to make sure they get spent out by the first sentence. And then the other requirement we were asked them is 30 days prior to the deadline of the purchase request at the district finance. Again, run another MUNIS report. Let us know that, hey, we have a plan to have these funds spent. Sorry, we have a plan to have all these funds spent out by the end of the year. And we've actually, with the increase in the minimum grant award this year, we did have a few less AFD participants because we finally hit that threshold that, the center funding could support the remaining, the full budget of the center. We also implemented this year. We went to I'm sorry, Kayla, you have a question?
Yes. So for me this year, like I went on maternity leave and was unpaid in November and December. So when I came back, we all had a budget amendment to do. So I guess the way AFD works, or how it seems to work, is that unpaid part of my salary was then redistributed to everyone's operational allocation, like every center. So like, I don't know. So it was like money taken from the Sutton Hager operation or like salary and then distributed to the high school, middle school, all the elementary schools. So I'm confused how all that works. Like I get that it needs to be spent, but why isn't it put into the operational budget for that center to go to those kids that are being serviced? Is it just because it has to go to everybody?
What you have to remember, Kayla, is that in an AFD, all salary and benefits come off the top first. So if there is a change in those salary and benefits, then it affects the new per pupil amount that is decided for every center based on free lunch. So in your case, there was salary not spent because of maternity leave. So the salary and fringe must be recalculated. And when it was recalculated, that determined that the per pupil amount per free lunch for you all, your operating budgets, would change. It affects everybody, not just the center that had the vacancy or the center, gets the new hire or the maternity leave. It affects you all as a whole. And that's something that's part of AFD. That's what AFD is. It's taking salary and benefits off the top and then distributing the money elsewhere. So when there are changes in that salary and fringe, it affects everybody, not just the center that it happens at.
And I just add in there as well that, in joining, when the district decides to become an AFD district, the minimum grant award, like your center, say it was a minimum award and you were supposed to get $50,000 to run your center. By joining in the AFD, you may get $60,000. So it's not that we're in AFD, they're taking it away just from your center. You may have benefited at the other end of it too, and being part of that AFD district. So, and hopefully that answers your question. If it didn't, you feel free to reach out to me or Teresa. We can go over it be more in depth and pull up your worksheet specifically and just kind of discuss it with you. This last year, we instituted this spreadsheet that you're seeing on your page. Basically, this is how AFD districts are supposed to operate. So just as a example, you can see that the total grant award, the original allocation in green, the column almost all the way to the right. So that's how much the whole district as a whole was going to get, $815,000. And to meet everyone's salary and fringe responsibilities, it's $547,000. So the remaining funds, that's what we're talking about. Those funds need to be divided up equally among the centers to have, so they have operating budgets for the year. And basically what they do is, simply put, they, we had, what is it here? $268,621 left after we paid out everyone's salary and fringe for the year. There were total 4,102 students, free lunch students. So that is $65.48 per student that that this school district could use to fund your operating budget. So, for example, up here at the top, if the very first youth service center, they had 390 at $65.48. Their operating budget for that year is going to be $25,500. In the example, now if that person's left and the next person comes in, see, all this is going to adjust. So that salary, say, drops to $35,000 for the year. All those funds have to be recalculated to adjust for that operating budget, because it's really the only way we can get all those funds spent out for the year. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Teresa, and she's going to take you through the day-to-day budgeting of the FRYSC centers.
Sorry, I couldn't get over there to unmute. I've been trying to answer questions on the side in the chat, so feel free to read those, or if you've still got some more questions, keep asking them. I'm not going to be able to do that anymore because I can't keep up. But I just want to talk to you about our day-to-day budgeting. We know, as Chris has explained, we have the contract between your school district and the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. That contract is signed every 2 years. It runs the years that your continuation program plans are going on. It's also the same years that our budgets are in place for what's passed in the state legislature. So as long as you are in compliance with the contract, your school district is doing all the things that they need to do, you as a coordinator are turning in information as we request it, your district actually receives 4 quarterly payments from FRYSC. I know Chris mentioned earlier, if there's carry forward funds, it's in that 3rd quarterly payment that they make the reduction in the funds that your district receives. But as long as the funds that you are receiving, those are maintained through MUNIS, and we all love MUNIS, and we're happy to have it. You work with your advisory council as the center coordinator. You're in charge of your budget, but you also work with your advisory councils to come up with your original budget for the school year. They have some input on that. They have to approve that original budget. Things like salary, what we consider fixed costs like salary and fringe benefits, those are all set by your local school board. Those are, what benefits they pay, what your salary scales are, those sorts of things are all set by your local board. As a coordinator, you are responsible for initiating and approving all expenditures. So by initiating expenditures, that means you're putting in for the POs, you're wanting to sign off on all your invoices. Some school districts require a second signature. It may be their policy that your school principal signs it as well, or your district contact signs it as well. And that's fine. But we at FRYSC, the division, the only requirement that we have is that you as the coordinator sign it. You want to make sure your districts, they do an end of the year MUNIS report that is due actually to Chris by August the 15th. So each year they are, I know he mentioned mid-year MUNIS reports that we may request as needed throughout the year, but every school district will do an end of the year MUNIS report for all the centers, which are due August the 15th. If you can advance the slide, Chris. Just a reminder, our fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th. We ask that funds be spent out, zeroed out, however you want to refer to it, by June 30th. Final bills, final invoices must be paid by July 25th. We want to make sure that we can't give you a finite date of when budgets for the next fiscal year are going to be due, simply because we're dependent upon the legislative session. We have to allow for the legislatures to have their session, allow for any period of time that the governor can veto line item things. Then you also have to let the legislators can come back and vote on those vetoes and that sort of thing. So and even though we've pulled numbers, Chris mentioned we've already done our initial pool and everything, we still can't give out allocation amounts until this session is actually over. So when that is available, we always give you timelines. We give you enough time so that you can have advisory council meetings so that you can get those budgets approved. We want to point out that in Appendix G of the Admin Guidebook, there is the commonly used MUNIS codes. It's not a full extensive list of all the codes out there that you can possibly use, but it is those commonly used codes that you as a coordinator would find most beneficial. But we do ask you to please, if there's something that you know you're going to purchase something that's not in the norm, but you're not for certain what code it should fall under, please ask your finance officers or your finance personnel, because they are going to be able to tell you what code they prefer, what code they want to see it to come from. And that way you can already have that code open. It's not something you have to go back later and do a budget amendment just to open up a specific code. You want to remember that you're responsible as the coordinator to upload and enter your original budget in FRYSC counts whenever we give you those due dates. They do need to be approved by your advisory council and noted in your minutes. And then your RPM will approve or deny or ask for more information and stuff. Those have to be approved and taken care of before June 30th, because July 1 starts our next fiscal year. So that's why we have that deadline. Some things that are excluded, things that we won't allow you to spend your allocation funds on, and that's like capital construction or acquisition or projects. So easiest way to say it, if it's going to be stationary in the wall, you're drilling a hole in the wall, it's something that's going to be there permanently, we can't do it. You can't buy paint to paint the walls. You don't like the color your office is and you want to buy paint with the allocation, you can't. If you want to buy materials and your carpentry class at the VOTEC builds you a cabinet and it's movable, you could pick it up and move it from one room to the next or put wheels on it and roll it, then that would be allowable. But if you want to drill holes in the wall and put shells on the wall, it's not. It's simple as that. We don't do reimbursement for consultant or anybody to do grant writing for you. So we can't pay people to write our CPP, and I know that's coming up next year, due next March 1st. So we can't hire anybody to do any grant writing for us. Employment of school level administrative coordination and or supervision. So in this case, you can't take the district can't take some of the FRYSC funds to pay for the district contact, give them a stipend for being your district contact, or give a stipend to the finance office because they handle your POs and do work. They can't take out a percentage because they're the physical agent, so to speak. So that's not allowable. Incentives for compulsory school attendance. So compulsory attendance is every day that the student is required to be there. That's the however many days or however many instruction hours, whatever your school's calendar is based on. Those are the days that they have to be in attendance. So you can spend any funds on that for trying to bribe them to come to school. But if it's a summer program, it's beyond the normal school day. It's an after-school program. If you want to offer the incentive of, if you come 4 out of 5 days of summer camp, then I'm going to give you a free pass to the local swimming pool. You can do that with your FRYSC allocation, but you cannot do anything for attendance, anything attendance related for a compulsory day, school day. We can't use we can't use our funding to cover the cost of drug testing or auditing services. School districts get audited every year, so a portion of our allocation cannot go to help pay for those auditing services. We can't use our funding to lease or purchase vehicles. We can't do any rent-to-own acquisition. So we can't, go out and rent that couch or rent furniture for our offices or help a family out and help, rent appliances or anything for them. Those are things that we cannot do with our allocation. So planning of programs and activities that are funded by other school money, state money, or federal dollars that they get, that's not something we can do either. And supplanting is something lots of times we get asked to do. This year, the school may have had a grant that covered the cost of something, but now that grant is no longer there, and now they want the FRYSC to pick up that cost. Well, we can't. That has already happened. The district was paying through other funds. We can't supplant that and use our FRYSC allocation to now take that job on. Staff salaries that are unrelated to the responsibilities pertaining to the center. So we can't, help pay for that music teacher, help pay for her salary because she comes half a day and does music programs with the kids. But we can pay for, if we're having summer camp or we're having an after-school program and we want a certified teacher to do some tutoring, or we want them to lead the camp and we're paying them to run our program, then yeah, you could pay a teacher that ESS stipend to do something along those lines.
Teresa, we have a couple questions in the chat.
All right.
One regard, districts have different dates. A lot of them say you have to have everything spent out by, or all your requisitions in by April 1st. And we have a question about how you plan for that summer spending when you do summer programming. The
first one about, you said April, they have a cutoff. A lot of districts will do this. They ask all their programs, not just FRYSC, but they'll ask, site-based money that each principal's in charge of, that sort of thing. But all the different programs, they're going to ask, they'll have a date and they'll ask for everybody to have their money encumbered. So what they're hoping is that everybody has a plan to spend their money out. They want to make sure that you have an idea of how money is going to happen. Most districts give that deadline to everybody, but they are kind of flexible with FRYSC because they know we work year round. They know we're working through June, and there may be things come up and we need another PO, or, things change. You plan on, 1 program or 2 programs, but only 1 happens. So that frees up some money and you need to spend it elsewhere. So when districts do impose those dates on coordinators, on centers, we ask the coordinators, you've got to go with what your district policy is. But we also ask that they understand and be flexible in that we may need to do a PO later on. We may need to make some changes. And if that's not, you don't feel like that's the case, then that's definitely something you want to talk with your regional program manager and your district contact, that maybe you can come in and they can help talk to your finance folks about that and make it a little bit easier for you. Because we are spending money, we're doing summer programs. And then the other question was, recognizing required, what are some suggestions for retaining funds to do these types of things? Lots of times you can ask other coordinators. That's a question I've seen several times put out there on the FRYSC Coalition Facebook page, and a lot of coordinators across the state can help you with, tell you, hey, I contact this bunch, I get summer grants, or I get grants from these different agencies. These are places you can write for mini grants. You can get the most information and the best information from some of your fellow coordinators. You'd be surprised how much they can help you. Helping with autism testing. Testing, if I'm assuming that's the testing that is done to that they're wanting to get the diagnosis of autism. That maybe I'm assuming that the diagnosis hasn't happened, and that's what you're asking for testing. Those would be school related and through their parents' insurance if they have it, depending on what type of insurance they have. It's not necessarily something that the FRYSC should be paying for. All right. Expenditures that are addressed in your advisory council bylaws. So we know that there are 4 expenditures that we must address in our bylaws. We have to have a criteria. We have to have a limit for each one of these 4 areas, and that is basic needs and emergency assistance. We need to determine what do we mean by basic needs? Is that clothing, hygiene products, shoes, coats? What is basic needs that you're able to pay for? And then how much, or what is the limit per child, per family, per year, or total amount that will be spent from your grant funds? Individual awards, recognition, and incentives, you need to give a criteria for that. Who do you provide these funds? Is any money, some folks don't have any money that go toward this, and they'll say no funds will be spent on this, and that's their limit and their criteria. Some folks will say, only for FRYSC sponsored programs and no more than X number of dollars per year. Those types of limits and criteria. Same way with food. Travel, we're asking for travel other than our center staff. So do you do student travel? Do you do field trips? Do you, take students to college visits and touring factories or VOTEC schools or whatever? And if you do, what's the limit that you'll spend per year or per event or per trip? Those are things that you want to make sure that you are reviewing your bylaws and make sure that you're spending money that match what your bylaws say. The cost of food has gone up quite a bit. If you've not revised your food amount in a while, you may be spending more money in food than your bylaws say that you will spend or that you're allowing per event. So make sure that you have you've looked at those, and if they need to be revised, make sure you revise it. Because we all know the cost of everything has skyrocketed. Some financial responsibilities for the coordinator. You want to remember that your district is going to provide you with training on their policies and their procedures. They tell you how to, put in for a requisition, and here's what happens once you put in for a requisition, and here's when your bills should be submitted, and what do we need, what invoices and so forth. You're also responsible to make sure that in order for you to be able to make sure your expenditures are where they need to be, that you're following, you're following your bylaws and all that stuff, you need to receive a monthly detailed MUNIS report. Whether you have desktop MUNIS and you're able to print those reports out yourself, it is important that you receive a monthly detailed MUNIS report. And we ask that because you are required to keep a running balance of all of your expenditures. We have the budget balance sheet that we have a copy on our FRYSC website that you're more than welcome to download and use. The formulas are all incorporated in there. You don't have to know anything about it in order to be able to use it. You may be an Excel spreadsheet guru and you make your own Excel spreadsheet. You may use another format. You may use ledger sheets and handwrite them out. But you are required to have some form, some way of keeping a running budget. By keeping that running budget, you're going to reconcile every month with that detailed journal MUNIS report. You're going to reconcile, and when we say reconcile, what we mean is on FRYSC counts, what is your current approved budget, those beginning amounts in each individual object code, those match what your budget balance sheets say, that those are the beginning budget amounts. Then you're taking your detailed journal MUNIS report and you're comparing and you're making sure, hey, I'm supposed to have $1,000 beginning balance in travel. Yep, that's what I have. Now, what have I spent in travel? Does it match what the balance says in MUNIS? Does it match what my budget balance sheets say? If you have a detailed journal, you're able to go through that line item by line item, and if there's a mistake or there's a discrepancy, you're able to go through and find that issue. That is one of the reasons why we say it's important that you receive them monthly. So if you're not receiving them monthly, that's something you need to make sure you contact your RPM about and reach out to them, reach out to your district contact, see if they can help you get them, then reach out to your RPM, because that is something you have to have because it is required for you to reconcile monthly.
Okay, so we have
Okay.
Hey,
You got a question?
Yes. So my district is the AFD. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
And so like this year, the first year ever, we do not put our salary and our fringe in FRYSC counts. We just put our operating budget. And that's kind of a nightmare. I don't know the reasoning behind that. But like when I did a budget amendment, I can't send that, like print that paper anymore and send that to my district finance person because like my salary and stuff isn't on it. So then I have to like make another sheet just for him. And like, it's just confusing because like not all of my money that I'm operating with is on FRYSC count. So like this is the first year we've had to do that. So what is like the reasoning behind just having operating budgets and not our actual like salary and all of that stuff included?
Because we received that spreadsheet that Chris showed you. That spreadsheet lets us know salary and benefits. If salary and benefits change in any way, your district is going to send us a new spreadsheet. So you are only working with your operating budget, so there was no need to continue to have all of that on there. Not all centers did it the way you did it that were AFD. A lot only did operating budget, and that's all that they've ever done. But it was, when you're doing a budget amendment, you shouldn't have to send them salary and benefits because those didn't change. They're not going to change. You're just changing the operating.
Mine is a little different because I do after school art program monthly. And so when I have after school art teachers, I do pay them. And my district also has me pay their fringe. So I have to change, like I would have to change their like KTRS because like, oh, I need more money. So that is listed on there. And then, do you know what I mean? It just adds a layer.
That's on your operating budget. That's on your operating budget numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I also have to be like, okay, well, I changed this for KTRS. Then I have to add my KTRS in, and then I have to send that to my finance department. So it's just finances this year has been super stressful. And then the other thing is a few slides ago, you mentioned like we usually in like around May, we get like, hey, you need to send in your budget. But like our deadline for our budget amendment is April. So we're only supposed to have one meeting at the end of the year, but it always ends up having to have two because our budget amendment is due in April, but we don't have our new budget until May. So you
don't have to wait till April 30th to do a budget amendment. You can do it in March.
Well,
I mean, you can do it at your March
meeting. I just feel like the end of the year, there's always something that has to be moved around. Like, And
Yeah.
maybe it's because I'm only doing like this is my 6th year as a coordinator, so maybe I just
Well,
haven't figured out the perfect.
We're hoping that with the change in the requirements for a budget amendment, that maybe some of those last minute budget amendments that you have to rush in and do in April may not have to take place because you have the $500 threshold. So maybe some of those won't have to, you won't have to do one. You always have the option of doing a virtual meeting and have a special called virtual meeting to present your budget and not have to meet in person. You've got those options out there. But yes, we understand, but there is not any way that we can change the April 30th date because that is in the contract that you have to do that 60 days prior to the end of the contract, which, it ends on, it's the end of the school year, which is just June 30th. That's why we have the April 30th deadline. So we can't change that. That's contractual. Hopefully, I feel like a lot of folks that had to do budget amendments in April may not have to do them because of the increase in, instead of it being 10% or $100, it's now $500. I feel like that's going to cut down on some of those budget amendments.
And then I know you mentioned like desktop MUNIS. My district this year has it's called My Finance, and it's not exactly MUNIS. Does that it communicates with MUNIS, but it's not like a MUNIS report like we've gotten in previous years. Does that suffice for our monthly MUNIS reports?
Piloting something different than MUNIS, is that what it is?
I mean, supposedly it communicates with MUNIS and it updates, but it doesn't look like it's not the exact format of a MUNIS report. Maybe it's something I need to ask my regional program manager, but it looks different. I can't print it off. I have to look at it on the computer, and it looks slightly different, but they were like, well, you have access to your budget now. But it's not exactly a detailed MUNIS report. It communicates with it. So I didn't know if that suffices.
Are you able to see all expenditures? Line item, each expenditure out each code?
I can. It's just
then that would be different. That's what a detailed journal is. Basically, it's letting you see all of the details for that object code.
Okay.
The POs that were implemented, when the invoice is paid, that's the general information. I mean, that's what you're getting from a MUNIS report. So if you're able to see that, then I would say it's sufficient.
Okay. Thank you.
We want to remember that our advisory councils must, at each advisory council meeting, you're sharing a financial report. Now, that financial report could be the summary page from MUNIS. It could be that summary page from your budget balance sheets. It can look however you want, but you can use whichever method you want. But what you're wanting to do is make sure that your advisory council is aware of your spending, how much money's left, that sort of thing. So make sure it's always noted in your on your agenda and that you note it in your minutes. Your advisory council also has to approve single item purchases over $500 or goods or services and subcontracts over $1,000. We want to make sure that when you get those approved, if you have a budget amendment or you have a purchase request and you've also presenting the financial report, make sure in your minutes when they make the motion that you list all of those things that they're making a motion on. If they're just making a motion on the financial report, then that's motion to approve, somebody second it, and so forth. But if they're also doing a budget amendment, make sure that's listed in that motion. I see lots of times when reading minutes that people don't mention the budget amendment. It's listed as an item on the agenda, but it's not mentioned in the minutes, nor that somebody voted on it. It's kind of wrapped into that financial report, I guess is the way they look at it. But you really do need to make sure it is listed separately in the motion or its own separate motion itself. So just make sure you do that when you've got those items on your agenda. We also, I guess you can forward that slide. We want to make sure that anytime we're talking about budgets and spending, we always want to use those guiding questions. Have them in the back of your mind. You know, is this tied to student learning? Is this part of my action components? Does this meet with the FRYSC mission, the goals and service delivery model? And if you don't know what the goals and the service delivery model is, it's in the admin guidebook. It's in one of the first sections of the admin guidebook. You know, is this something that's limited by the contract? We mentioned a bunch of expenditures that we are not allowed to do. Those are all straight from the contract and the admin guidebook. So is it something that falls under one of those limits? Is it something that the school or the district should be purchasing anyway? Did it fall under Kentucky administrative regulations, guidelines for free waivers for students that are on free and reduced lunch? So if it does, if it's a free and reduced lunch student, then the school district, it's their responsibility to cover the cost. And, you know, we always say, you know, if a legislator asks you why you purchased something, can you justify that purchase? Can you justify that expenditure? Would you be able to do that? So those are just guiding questions we always ask you to keep in mind. Remember that we've made a change this year, starting in July. Any MUNIS code in the most recent approved budget, if it changes by $500 or more in a cumulative fiscal year, then you've got to do a budget amendment. Anytime you open a new code, that also means you've got to do a budget amendment. No matter what amount of money you're opening that code for and putting in it, because you're opening a new code, it requires a budget amendment. Hopefully, as we mentioned earlier, this will cut down on the number of budget amendments that people have had to do. I know lots of times I have folks that turn them in April, and it's just pretty much moving a few dollars here and a few dollars there, just so that they can clear up, you know, what used to be our rule of 10% or $100. And now, you know, it's $500. They don't have to do a budget amendment unless that change is more than $500. So hopefully that'll cut down on some work for you and having to have an extra meeting. Let's see. Physical record keeping. We know that you got to keep records, and people keep records differently. And we always say, you know, what makes sense to you is the best way to do it. Most people are going to have a budget notebook. They're going to keep copies of all their purchase orders and invoices. You can organize it by months. You know, some folks will organize it by the object code. So they have tabs in their notebook, and under each object code, when they spend money out of that, they have their PO and their invoices, and it's filed behind that tab. Some people like to organize themselves by month. So as their monthly bills that they paid during the month of August, they put them all together, and that's under an August tab. It is important that you keep those detailed monthly journal reports that you've used to reconcile. You can put them behind their own tab. You can, if you like to organize yourself by month, then you'd want to put them with that month. You also need a tab where you're listing your donation logs and your updated balance sheets for those non-state funds, whether it's donations or fundraisers or any other grant funds that you're taking in, and you're keeping those logs and keeping those records as well. You'll need tabs for those. You want to, as you look at this next slide, it's got a copy of a MUNIS report, and it's just the summary page. You'll notice in the first column, it's got the revised budget amount. That amount should be, that are in that column for each one of those object codes, should be what is on FRYSC counts as your current approved budget. Those beginning budget amounts, those codes that are approved in FRYSC counts should be in that first column. That should be the amounts they should match. Now, the summary report, if you had a discrepancy or an issue with your budget balance sheets and this report, there's no way for you to go back and pinpoint where the error is. It's impossible. That is, this summary report is good for just a quick look-see. It's good for, that could be something that you hand your advisory council, but it's not going to help you reconcile with your reconcile with your budget balance sheets. So if you look at the next slide, this is a copy of a detailed MUNIS report, a detailed journal. It's showing one code 0679. And as you look at it, you'll notice that that first line item in July, that is what the original amount was. That was what the original budget was. They've put that in there, and you can see that that is what they started with. Then as you go through the line items, you'll see there on August the 20-something, they had a PO that was to Walmart. They're going to buy some hairbrushes. That PO was opened. It was for $50. Then underneath that, you'll find where it says that same purchase order, and they've got the abbreviation API. That is where they paid the invoice. They applied it to the invoice. The actual invoice was really $64.79. Then underneath that, it's the same PO number, and that is where the POL, that's where they closed out the PO. So the original PO was for $50, so they closed it out. You'll see the minus in front of the 50. But you need to note that what was actually paid was $64.79. And if you follow over, and it's hard to see on this slide, but you'll see that it went to Walmart and it has the check number that was issued to Walmart. So if you say, they paid $64.79 is what this says, but on my invoice, it should have been $75 or it should have been $80. Then you can go back to the district and help figure out what happened, what went wrong, why that check was issued for what it was, and that'll clear up your discrepancy. Sometimes these MUNIS reports can be very convoluted. It throws people off, the fact that you'll see the same PO number 3 times, but you've got to remember that they open up the PO, they apply that PO to the invoice, they pay the invoice, and it may be a different amount, and then close out the PO for what it was originally written for. That throws people off sometimes, but the more you do this, the easier it gets. Sometimes there'll be journal entries, and it should in the description tell you what the journal entry is for. So if you have to do an amendment, it will let you know what the amendment was for. You'll notice that there are check numbers beside in the description line for that business and that organization, and that helps out when you've got a discrepancy or got an issue. So I have seen all kinds of questions pop up on the side, and I know that you have got more, and I've seen some RPMs have been answering some of the questions. So thank you all who's on here that's been helping do that. Is there any other questions that anybody has that didn't get answered or you need a little bit more explanation on? I see. Detailed journal entry is, if you'll go to that slide before, Chris, it's giving more explanation of what happened. It's giving you every entry, everything that's happened under that object code. It's not just a summary and giving you totals. It's actually saying there was a PO that was entered on August the 25th. Then on September 22nd, we applied that PO for that bill. And then on the 22nd of September, we closed that out. So it is telling you exactly everything that transpired under that object code. It's giving you detailed journal. Sometimes a journal entry that a finance officer will do could be, you got to pay for a field trip. So instead of them cutting a check to the bus garage, they will do a journal entry and remove that amount and just transfer it in-house, so to speak, to the bus garage funds. So they do a journal entry to transfer that money to another MUNIS account within the school district. If they've got to send a check to somebody outside of the district, it would be a check, but they can do journal entries if maybe you've got to pay back the school paid for something for you, and they do a journal entry to give those funds back to the school, that sort of thing. Any other questions?
So when you do not have to do a budget amendment because you're not moving more than $500, you still change that those amounts on FRYSC counts, like on that paper, and you just don't have to submit like it as a budget change, or how does that work? Do you still need to change it on FRYSC counts?
I have done some, hold on, I can't find this. I don't know what I've done. Oh, here it is. It's back. I'm sorry. I was clicking on stuff and I went totally blank. Okay. You can overspend in codes up to $500. You don't necessarily have to change the beginning amounts in FRYSC counts. Go in FRYSC counts and change those amounts, so to speak. If for instance, you've got $1,000 in travel and you've spent $600 in travel, but you're not going to spend any more in travel. So when you look at your MUNIS report, you got $400 in there left. Same way with on your budget balance sheets. You can leave that code as is and not make any changes to it, not do a budget amendment to it. There's going to be another code or other codes that you spend over in, and you'll still zero out at the bottom. But if you say you've only spent $400 in travel and that leaves $600, then yes, you're going to have to do a budget amendment to move that money someplace else because it's over $500. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Any other questions? Now's the time to ask. And you might have that question, but I'm sure there's somebody else out there that has it too. Looks like Quentin has dropped the survey link into the chat. And this year is the first year, you know, we changed our ruling on budget amendments. You know, we're doing something different. When in doubt, always ask your RPM. It's going to take us, you know, everybody to get used to it. So feel free to, you know, reach out to the RPMs. That's what we're here for. And Quentin's also put the approval code in here as well.
All right. Well, if there's not any other questions, we'll kind of wrap this up here. We do want to thank Crisscross and Teresa Combs both for being on here. I know when I was a coordinator, when it comes to budgets, there's so much information and sometimes you don't understand a lot of the things because you're so, you're having to focus obviously on your school and your center and things. So this is even for me, since I've worked in the division now, I understand things so much more just because they do such a great job of organizing it and explaining it. So we thank you for taking the time to do that. And then I think Heather McCarty was on her answering some questions as well. RPM, we had a couple of other RPMs on as well. Thank you for your help in assisting and answering some of the questions because that's the biggest advice I can give the coordinators. Reach out to your RPMs if you have questions on that. Listen, they're willing to help and they understand this stuff. And Crisscross does a great job with the budget. And, you know, he can help you in ways that I know that I'm not going to be able to myself. He's our go-to expert there. So thanks for taking the time to do this. Beth Martin, thanks for setting it up. And we'll get this put on the training hub here. Probably give us about a week. So I'm sure there's some things you want to go back and rewatch and say, hey, I forgot this or I didn't see that. So once we get that put up, you're more than welcome. And I'm actually going to drop a link to the training hub as well, to the homepage. And you can just explore that as you want. There is one of the tabs says Wednesday webinars. So, you know, you click on that and it'll take you to the Wednesday webinars that we've had. So I'm going to drop that in the link as well. There's no other questions. What I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I'll stay on here. So if anybody has any other questions, if you need to see the link again, or if you need to get the approval code, you can ask me and I'll put it back in there. But once again, thanks for joining us. And Teresa, Chris, great job. Appreciate you all as always.